Let's go!
This game got a huge balance patch recently, and it started the conversation of balance, where it's like, oh god, what the hell are you doing with the balance of this game? Why are fighting games so hard to balance? Yada yada yada. Like this whole conversation has been surged into the spotlight all over again, and it brings up an interesting topic, and we have like a lot of comparatives to go through here. So obviously NRS took the approach of the shotgun to the knee. They Skyrimmed several elements of the game to just sort of tone it down, because obviously some things came in pretty hot just in terms of overall balance and gameplay, and we tend to forget things as they, you know, go away a couple of weeks. But in the first month of this game, there was an absolute astronomical amount of ridiculous gameplay bugs that it's almost hilarious to think that people were playing this game for money in that time frame. Many of those got fixed, which is great. But now with the first big balance patch only just about a month after, everything got toned down a bit. So they took the approach, we don't have an exact tell on where this game's going to go competitively, or much less how people are playing it, but we know what's going on right now. Boop, drop it down. Take it down boop, a little bit. We were all hoping they weren't going to go blah. We weren't hoping for this kind of a spike, right? People are like, oh, you just want everyone to be buffed and broken and the game's going to suck. No. This is where the game was at. They brought it to here. We were kind of hoping they were going to put it here. Just a little bit above where it was currently at, but they didn't. They took the usual approach, right? The usual approach for a game like MK, much less NRS games, is to go down, and then the next one is historically down again, and then potentially down again. And by the time you get to the way later, then it starts going back up again. That's how long it takes. And this back up thing could take a long time, dude. Quite some time to get the game to go back up to levels where it's like, oh, characters got even more stuff. They actually retooled this character how they works. Like, that has happened several times in the history of NRS games, to eventually get back to that point where it's like, oh, it's fun, and now it's actually pretty good. Comparatively, that isn't exactly a bad way of balancing things. It just leaves an ugly taste in the mouth of people that have been playing a lot of NRS games over the past 10 plus years, because this is just, once again, following a trend that they do with every single game. But looking at other fighting games, and what the hell do they do, right? What the hell do other fighting games do to balance their roster? I think a great example of this is KOF 15. KOF 15, historically, I don't know if the latest patches have changed this. KOF 15, the way they approach balancing is very fascinating. They do power shifts. For a while, for like 3 to 5 months, you're going to have these crazy buff characters. The top tiers are defined in KOF. Anyone remember when like Terry was absolutely godlike and Ralph was ridiculous? And like there were several characters at the beginning that were just nuts, right? And they were clearly good. And then the power shift happened, and then other characters came in and essentially took their place. The main guys got normalized a bit, still pretty decent, but they got switched out for other characters that weren't nearly as good. So it was like, keep approaching balance in that way to sort of have the lesser used characters suddenly good, and then the most frequently used characters suddenly not so good. It's a weird way of balancing that I don't think I've felt that much in fighting games that I've been following and making videos about for quite some time. But it does offer some pretty interesting variety when it comes to how the game is played competitively. And even some competitive players are like, we know we're getting a balance patch soon. I'm not playing the top tiers anymore. It's like, what the fuck are you playing? Who do you think is going to get buffed? And these guys would have predictions. This is how their community is. I'm starting to pick up this character and this character because these characters I think are going to get buffed because they're not good. That is how the best KOF players started approaching balance to their game. They tried to like get ahead of what the developers were doing. Sometimes they do, and they're like, oh yeah, my bitch got buffed, let's go. So already in that first week, they're like way ahead of everybody. I don't think that's exactly like the right answer as well. There's another really funny example I have of what I think is actually an incredibly good balance to what is seemingly one of the most busted characters in the series history. This is a game that not everybody likes a lot, but clearly had some pretty dramatic balancing changes with a very limited period of time that they had while the game was even relevant. We're talking only a few months. You might be surprised that it's Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. The large-scale balance patch that happened for this game took place within like a month and a half after the game came out. It went through an absolute metric shit ton of changes, and I'd like to tell you a story of Dante. Dante at MVCI at launch was fucking stupid. He might have been one of the best versus game characters ever made. They just gave him all the shit from the previous game that he had, and now it was all easier to do, and now it all led to full combos, and now he gave out a whole bunch of new shit that was even easier to open people up. He was insane. He was lore accurate Dante. He was blowing up Galactus. It didn't matter. So a patch came out. Interesting approach. Of course they're going to nerf Dante. I want you to see how much shit is in here for him. Yeah, okay. Whoa, okay. Oh, and then for other characters, Captain America, one thing. Chun-Li, one thing. Strider, a few things. Some other characters got a few things, Dormammu. Dude, look at Dante's changes. This shit, when we got the PDF of it, was 3 pages long, bro. When we play this character, nothing is going to work. We're literally going to play this guy and nothing's going to even combo anymore. They ripped this bitch's legs off. This is crazy. And you know what's crazy about this patch? Even with all these changes, he's still the best in the game. After all of these changes. And you know what I call that? I think that's actually insanely good balancing. Is that a weird take? I think it's a weird take because in the history of fighting games, when you have a character that's arguably fucked up, dude, what happens to them? I'd like you to look at this image of this character and tell me what you think about him. This guy had that happen to him. This guy went through this process. He was insane. Injustice 1 Scorpion was wild. This guy went from being the best character in the game, and in one more patch, he was bottom of the barrel worst. They made him like almost unplayably bad. It was insane how hard they went on this guy. I think that's a really unfortunate situation. That's a power shift that's way too big. They went so far in one direction that they pretty much cut off his arms, his legs, and his head, which is why I almost commemorate Capcom in this moment of clarity, where it's like, okay, so Dante's clearly the best bitch in this game. We're gonna change all of this shit. We're gonna literally nerf his ass into the ground. He's still really good. So even with all of these changes, there was a level of understanding that, okay, so if we go that hard on this guy, no one's going to play him. Do we want Dante to be a character that very few people play in our game? No, we don't. They made a lot of changes, but they were pretty well considered. They at least took a little bit of time and then approached it in this fashion. Dante's still mad good, and he's arguably one of the best characters in the game, but he's definitely way more beatable than he was before. So the other one from NRS is this girl, probably in the same comparative. So we got, I think these two characters are very comparable. Tanya from MKX and this bitch, the alien from Mortal Kombat X. 2 DLC characters that were absolutely insane. These are both Rekka characters, by the way. It was sort of further cementing that NRS didn't really know how to make like a Rekka character. They insanely busted. Like the delay they had to their Rekkas left them plus on everything. So they got nerfed pretty quick. However, they're pretty decent, right? Their changes left them still good characters, but not nearly as top tier as before. So that is definitely a lot better than what happened to poor boy Scorpion in this situation. NRS has a history of like leaning in and then also leaning back and figuring stuff out. Again, balancing fighting games is not easy. And then you have crazy stuff. I call this the DLC anomaly. Sometimes you get these characters that come out in fighting games, and it's just obvious that the devs love the character, and they make them so ridiculously good that it's insane, right? You start to question, do they even know what makes a good character? Because why would you do this? I don't think fits any other character more than Leroy Smith in Tekken 7. Leroy got turned into a fair character, right? He's still okay as of right now. And it almost feels like they came out in a way where they make the DLC characters like better, where it's like, oh yeah, he's DLC, and they're obviously making you want to buy the character, right? They obviously want you to buy this bitch. And I don't know if that's the case. What I do think is there is a DLC anomaly when it comes to the balance of fighting games, where a lot of DLC characters historically in a lot of fighting games, the previous roster is not as good as the DLC characters. And I don't think this comes across as like, yeah, we're just gonna make the DLC better so you spend the $20. I don't think it's as nefarious as that. I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt considering what's been happening lately. I think it's more that the devs start to feel a little bit more freedom with how their characters can work. Leroy got a stick. He got something that historically is not in a ton of Tekken games, where you give the character like a one-time use tool in a match. Not a ton of characters have that outside of the weird goofball shotguns and equipables they historically get from previous games. So he already gets a stick. They try to push the boundaries of how shit works. Even Noctis, to a degree, was kind of like that, where some of his shit was not low parryable. He had a sword, right? Arguably one of the most linear characters ever in Tekken, because he's practically from Soul Calibur. But still, they try to take these approaches with DLC characters that leave you in a situation that makes you question, are they just trying to get us to buy this stuff so we can win more? Like, what the shit is going on? That definitely has been an anomaly that's been happening in fighting games for quite some time, where some of the DLC is just wild. Dragon Ball FighterZ is definitely that way with a lot of the Itas, Gogeta, the Gogito Fritos that have been added to the game over time. Many of those characters have been absolutely friggin' insane. So I think the moral of the story here, because there's a lot of examples of insane balancing in fighting games. We got the Bayonetta situation. We got the Happy Chaos situation. All these characters are also DLC characters. Fighting games are tough as shit to balance, because there's one thing I have to remind everybody about fighting games before they come out. And that simple fact is kind of a hard pill to swallow for many, but developers don't actually know how their game is going to be played. A lot of devs put in tools for their games for the players to use, and they test the shit out of them, right? They test the holy hell out of them. It was obvious MK1 was a game that got a ton of testing. There was a ton of professionals. There was a ton of people that knew a ton about how fighting games work and how NRS games work. And they went in, gave reception, and worked on that game before it came out to make it feel a lot better and be a much better game than it was what we played, you know, at Summer Games Fest. So that's true. However, it still came out with like a ridiculous amount of bugs and issues and ridiculous balancing, right? Things that were not immediately discovered week one, but got discovered down the line, right? That took quite some time. And that leads us to the final, like, big part of balancing that I think we got to talk about, which is another fighting game that is approaching this all with a level of tact that is starting to piss people off. Street Fighter 6 has no patch. No balancing patch yet. It's had bug fixes, but no direct balancing yet for any of its characters. The devs even came out as such within the first month of the game and said, you're not seeing a patch for our game until after Akuma's out. We still have like 9 months of Street Fighter 6 being the way it is for quite some time. And I kind of like that. I know it's annoying and the meta's been figured out. The toughest thing that has happened to Street Fighter 6 is that there hasn't been things to interrupt that yet. We don't need exactly balance changes all the time, but we do need new characters and we do need new content to make it feel fresh in some way. And it's clearly sort of lagging behind in several ways. I think by the time Akuma comes out, it's going to be like a much different game just because we're going to have even more characters and all of that stuff. But it's pretty clear that they thought a lot about their mechanics and they're trying to approach it in a way where it's like, let's see where this goes. And you know what? Yeah, you run into a lot of Kens. JP's a dominant terror in the game. If Street Fighter 6 took a similar shotgun to the knee balance approach that we've seen with some other fighting games even recently, if they did that same thing, then Guile's Sonic Booms might have 5 more frames of recovery. Jury's dash could be twice as slow as it was now. DJ might not have any invulnerability on any of his EX moves because those were some of the characters that were complained about the most in week 1 of the game. Everyone thought Guile was like the best character in the game. Most people in the first week of the game thought Cammy wasn't that great. So to give them the benefit of the doubt, they were right. They were definitely right to wait on shit. And I have to give them a little bit of credit on waiting on a balance patch, and not credit on being really delayed with like content and stuff like that. Characters that are widely considered to be some of the worst in the game, bottom 5 characters. We just made a video about it and talked about it. Now even Rashid winning a major. Ending Walker's Ryu doing super well. I think that's crazy and really fascinating. I don't think there is a genuine de facto answer for balancing in fighting games. I'd like to bring up a video. Hold on a second. One more video of an approach to balancing that a lot of it is hindsight, where you have this mystical 2020 vision. So this is from Keats over at Iron Galaxy. Killer Instinct went through a lot of like rapid changes over its many iterations, right? 3 different versions of KI. Like all this shit happened to it. Characters got completely retooled and reworked over their versions. There's a little anecdote from Keats, who was the lead combat designer on KI, of how they approached balancing later on. How to balance a game, much less react to the community and engage with the community, and have that be sort of not of a great thing, because people love to complain about shit, man. So let's just listen to this really quick.
Let's have a dialogue and be part of the community and show up to tournaments and play against top players. And in casual stations. Instead of having the live streams for character reveals and balance reveals be showed off by community managers, what if the combat design team was on the couch doing it? And we could really explain ourselves and really talk to people about not only what we did, but why we did it. I call it a failed experiment because what I think it ended up doing was also poisoning the well in a kind of way. It kind of spoiled people. There were definitely a group of players who considered themselves top players who became more interested in influencing the development of the game than they became interested in solving the game and being great at it. And that resulted in a lot of ultra negativity, a lot of, kind of rallying their fans to kind of become a bandwagon of kind of hatred and negativity towards the developers, towards our balance choices. So that was a pretty crazy adventure. I think I learned a lot about it, about how to approach balancing games. I think my views on how to do it basically 180'd from the beginning of KI to the end. And I also learned a lot about how to decipher kind of the code of group speak. I'm gonna give you a great example of this. A lot of people are really mad.
So this is one of the best examples of something we heard constantly in KI about balancing that people always complained about, which was Jago. You have to fight 3 characters because he can heal himself. And this is why sitting and sometimes waiting on the situation is usually a better idea than trying to just shotgun to the knee or to the face of how a character works.
At a certain thing, and they're rallying together to be mad together because they want change, right? Jago is too strong. His healing is through the roof. I did all that damage, and now he's got it back. I'm pissed, Iron Galaxy. What gives, right? And I think, maybe a less experienced developer will be like, I guess the healing's too much. They're all saying it's too much. Let's reduce the healing. We did not do that. We instead took 4 months to really study Jago and figure out the root of the problem. We wanted to find the disease, not the symptom. Because we always had this feeling that the healing was a symptom. And when we really dug into it, we were like, okay, Jago doesn't have any bad matchups in the entire game. His worst matchup's a 5-5. Why is that? Jago's not weak anywhere on the screen, actually.
He wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong. Jago covered everything.
Only kind of weak mid-screen. He's really good full screen and he's really good up close. But as soon as he's mid-screen, he has this magical move called the wind kick, where he's immediately in your face and he's only -2. So he can immediately get out of his worst distance in any matchup and be at his best distance. So we nerfed wind kick frame advantage. We didn't nerf the healing. We said, okay, medium and heavy wind kicks are more minus now. The heavy one's punishable. The medium one is sometimes punishable. And we told people why we did it in the patch notes, and they hated it. They all erupted. This is not what we asked for. We wanted you to nerf the healing. The healing is what was pissing us off. Why did you do this? Jago players are gonna have to rethink their game plan now, so they're pissed too. Everyone's big mad. And then a month and a half later, no one was complaining about Jago anymore. And new matchup charts were coming out, and Jago now had 4 or 5 bad matchups in the cast. Because we found the disease. The disease was that this character had no weakness on the screen. And I think developers really have to spend a lot of time trying to find the disease instead of listening to people crying about the symptoms,
Moral of the story is that there's a lot of different ways that we have seen developers approach and balance fighting games. None of them are specifically right. Is it a good thing that it takes 2 years for people to figure out a character? I think that's an interesting thing, but maybe not. What I do think is based on gut reaction patches that a lot of people put out for games. And the reason I disagree with it is because of this. Developers most likely have no idea how their game is actually going to play when it gets in the hands of 10,000 people, much less 100,000 people, much less 500,000, a million, 2 million. There's no way, even with the best players on the planet, to play a character in a way like some absolute new player would, where they just mash their face on the controller and, oh shit, they found an infinite or something like that. Can never be accounted for in a fighting game. Fighting games are hard to balance. There's a lot of ways of doing it. And it's just interesting to see the devs' approach, because we have 2 of the big boys like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, and they are tackling things exactly opposite, right? MK, quick reaction. Street Fighter, very delayed reaction. I think we're in an interesting time frame where there's more people playing fighting games than ever, and now there's more people reacting and gut reacting to things that are in fighting games than ever before. All I gotta say is that we got another one coming out in the very near future. We've already seen a lot of changes in the game from beta 1 to beta 2. And man, I am hella curious what Tekken 8's release version is going to be like compared to those betas, because holy shit, if you want to talk about the kitchen sink of like 3D fighting game Tekken games, Tekken 8 kind of has it all, dude.